Hey everybody, welcome to Dialectics Hour. Today we're going to be finishing up um, the first chapter of Marx's Capital and reading this section on fetishism. And so let's go ahead and get started. So let's see. Got the text right here. So we finished the account of fetishism, and or at least like the main thrust of it at the beginning. And now Marx turns to some a discussion of some of the more some of the ways that bourgeois political economy misunderstands what it's seeing, um, and some of the kind of like theory of ideas that is developed in Capital as well as theory of ideology. So sorry, I'm trying to find the German here. So okay, reflection on the forms of human life, hence also scientific analysis of these forms, takes a course directly opposite to their real development. So we have a juxtaposition between reflection, das Nachdenken. So like think of it like nach can mean like after, so like thinking in the after the fact of the forms of human life and their scientific analysis. That these take a course opposite their um, real development. That's wirklichen Entwicklung. So wirklich is like actual, their actual development. Reflection begins post festum, after the feast, or after the events have taken place, and therefore with the results of the process of development ready to hand. One might recall Hegel's famous statement from the Philosophy of Right, from the preface, which says, "The owl of Minerva flies at night," meaning after the world stage has been reached is when philosophy comes in and thinks about it. The forms which stamp products as commodities, and which are therefore the preliminary requirements for the circulation of commodities, already possess the fixed quality of natural forms of social life, before man seeks to give an account, not of their historical character, for in his eyes they are immutable, but of their content and meaning. So what Marx is saying is that commodities and commodity production and the laws that govern commodity production have already taken hold in society before the economists come in and try to understand these things. And when they try to understand them, they mistake them for something immutable. They mistake them. I mean, you talk to, if you ever debate with a bourgeois economist, or one of those libertarian debate bro types. I've been having some fun on my TikTok account today with some people who subscribe to this free market fundamentalism. And you ask them about the economy of say, like the Middle Ages or ancient Greece or earlier stages of production, and they see them as basically operating with the same kind of capitalist concepts, or they just are completely ignorant of these earlier states of production because they see markets and capital and these capital exchanges as if they were immutable laws of history, not as the product of a historical development in society. Consequently, it was solely the analysis of the prices of commodities which led to the determination of the magnitude of value, solely the common expression of all commodities in money, which led to the establishment of their character as values. It is, however, precisely this finished form of the world of commodities, the money form, which conceals the social character of private labor and the social relations between the individual workers by making those relations appear as relations between material objects instead of revealing them plainly. So this, again, is fetishism, where one doesn't see that what's going on in an exchange is I'm taking one form of labor and transforming it into another, but one instead thinks that this thing is worth a certain amount of money and this thing's worth a certain amount of money, when really it's a trade between two types of labor, because we're seeing it as the finished product measured in money as opposed to different forms of labor. If I state that coats or boots stand in the relation to linen because the latter is the universal incarnation of abstract human labor, the absurdity of the statement is self-evident. Nevertheless, when the producers of coats and boots bring these commodities into a relation with linen or with gold and silver, and this makes no difference here, as the universal equivalent, the relation between their own private labor and the collective labor of society appears to them in exactly this absurd form. It's a difficult passage. So the word here is verrückten Form. And so like verrückt is like irrational or crazy. Let me get an exact definition for you. Crackpot, weirdos. Oh, those are verrückte, the people. But let me get the adjective form. But crazy, psycho. These are the terms that coming up in the dictionary. So okay. When the producers, they bring these commodities into relation with linen or with gold and silver as the universal equivalent, the relation between their own private labor and the collective labor of society appears to them as this exactly absurd form. This absurd form being that the boots relate to the linen as opposed to the labor relating to each other. The categories of bourgeois economics consist precisely of forms of this kind. And here's something very interesting. They are forms of thought which are socially valid and therefore objective for the relations of production belonging to this historically determined mode of social production, i.e. commodity production. The whole mystery of commodities, all the magic and necromancy, that's this like dead labor being turned into living labor and stuff like that. We'll get more into that later in the book. That surrounds the products of labor on the basis of commodity production vanishes, therefore, as soon as we come to other forms of production. So there's this fetishism, this mystery in commodity production that does not exist within other forms of production. But what's interesting is that these absurd forms, these verrückten Form, verrückte Formen, while they are absurd, and here appearance is not seems, it's erscheint. So, like it does in fact appear. These are objectively valid forms. And so, right, if you read Adam Smith, or David Ricardo, there's a lot of places where Marx agrees with the classical political economists, and he thinks that they're able to see into true facts about the capitalist mode of production. Yet, these socially valid categories appear within a certain absurd form. They are, as it were, like a science of appearance that really does describe how things appear, but doesn't describe what's behind the appearance. It's like phenomenology, basically. As political economists are fond of Robinson Crusoe stories. Now, I don't know if people are familiar with Robinson Crusoe. My students certainly never are, because I'm always talking about it with Marx. Um, but I'm pretty sure I read Robinson Crusoe as a kid. I read a lot of those like um, classics of literature, being homeschooled, and meaning most of my education was reading books. And this is about an English guy who crashes on a desert island by himself, and he ends up like kind of just rebuilding a one-person society, and he's like introducing a banking system and stuff. He meets an indigenous person, so of course, being an English uh, person, white person, enslaves the indigenous person, makes him a servant. The servant's name is Friday, but that's the where Marx gets this term Robinsonade when referring to the theories of people like Rousseau, Locke, all these people who want to start in a state of nature, this hypothetical state of nature. So let us first look at Robinson on his island. Even Ricardo has his Robinson Crusoe stories. Ricardo makes his primitive fisherman and primitive hunter into owners of commodities who immediately exchange their fish and game in proportion to the labor time, which is materialized in these exchange values. On this occasion, he slips into the anachronism of letting the primitive fisherman and hunter to calculate the value of their implements in accordance with the annuity tables used in the London Stock Exchange of 1817. Apart from bourgeois society, the paleolograms of Mr. Owen seem to be the only form of society Mr. Ricardo was acquainted with. Okay, so Robinson on the island. Undemanding though he is by nature, he still has his needs to satisfy, and thus therefore perform useful labors of various kind. He must make tools, knock together furniture, tame llamas, hunt fish, and so on. Of his prayers and the like, we take no account here, since our friend takes pleasure in them and sees them as recreation. So the prayer is fine. We're not going to count that labor. Marx is always a witty writer. That's much appreciated. Despite the diversity of his productive functions, he knows that they are only different forms of activity of one and the same Robinson, hence only different modes of human labor. Necessity itself compels him to divide his time with precision between different functions. Whenever one function occupies a greater space in his total activity than another, depends on the magnitude of the difficulties to be overcome in attaining the useful effect aimed at. Our friend Robinson Crusoe learns this by experience, and having saved a watch, ledger, ink, and pen from the shipwreck, he soon begins, like a good Englishman, to keep a set of books. His stockbook contains a catalog of the useful objects he possesses, of the various operations necessary for their production, and finally of the labor time that specific qualities of these products have on average cost him. All the relations between Robinson and these objects that form his self-created wealth are here so simple and transparent that even Mr. Seeley Taylor could understand them. And yet those relations contain all the essential determinants of value. So Engels changed it to somebody that the British would know here. Some Cambridge Dawn. Oh, it's the guy in the fourth German edition that he gets in that like beef with in one of the prefaces, which we haven't gone through here. So Robinson's doing all his work and he's keeping a ledger account of it. Let us now transport ourselves from Robinson's island, bathed in light, to medieval Europe, shrouded in darkness. Here, instead of the independent man, we find everyone dependent. Serfs and lords and vassals, suzerains. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correct. I remember them from the video game Age of Empires, but I don't remember what they do. Laymen, clerics. Personal dependence characterizes the social relations of material production as much as it does the other spheres of life based on that production. But precisely because relations of personal dependence form the given social formation, there is no need for labor and its products to assume a fantastic form different from the reality. So this is a point that Marx will make later in Capital again. But basically what he's saying is that there's no fetishism in feudal relations. You just make the grain and you give the grain that you have to your knight. It's very obvious who's exploiting you. And that you're not receiving the full product of your labor. That somebody else is skimming some of it. Right? They take the shape in the transactions of society of services in kind and payments in kind. The natural form of labor, its particularity, and not, as in a society based on commodity production, its universality, is here its immediate social form. So I guess when people are bartering and trading, the particular form of labor is what appears, not the universal form. The corvée can be measured by time just as well as the labor which produces commodities. But every serf knows that what he expends in the service of his lord is a specific quantity of his own personal labor power. Right? That's what's hidden in capitalism, is that there's a certain amount of time that you're working for the boss as opposed to working for your wage. The tithe owed to the priest is more clearly apparent than his blessing. Whatever we may think, then, of the different roles in which men confront each other in such a society, the social relations between individuals in the performance of their labor appear at all events as their own personal relations and are not disguised as social relations between things, between products of labor. There's no fetishism in feudalism. For an example of labor in common that is directly associated with labor, so I think here this would be an example of people working together in a factory. We do not need to go back to the spontaneously developed form, which you find at the threshold of the history of all civilized people. A ridiculous notion, has spread abroad recently that communal property in its natural spontaneous form is specifically Slav, indeed exclusively Russian. In fact, it is the primitive form that we can prove to have existed upon Romans, Teutons, and Celts, which indeed still exists to this day in India, in a whole range of diverse patterns, although sometimes only as remnants. A more exact study of the Asiatic, specifically the Indian form of communal property, would indicate the way in which different forms of spontaneous primitive communal property gave rise to different forms of dissolution. Thus, the original types of Roman and Germanic private property can be deduced from the different forms of Indian communal property. I think that's where that whole Asiatic mode of production stuff comes in, but that's kind of a tangent that I don't have a off the top of the head lecture about. But yeah, different forms of communal property have existed in society, generally speaking. We have one nearer at hand in the patriarchal rural industry of the peasant family, which produces corn, cattle, yarn, linen, and clothing for its own use. So this would be household production, domestic production. These things confront the family as so many products of its collective labor, but they do not confront each other as commodities, right? So within a household, shit, I wish I had my lecture notes about this, but actually I might be able to grab them real quick. Sorry, yeah, I guess I don't have my notebook from teaching this year, but if you look at how a household functioned, there was a large amount of even in the 1800s tasks that were necessary for the household that were done mostly by women in the household, like making all the clothes, dyeing the clothes, doing the big loads of wash, because they wouldn't wash their clothes all the time. They would do one big load of wash at a certain point in time. Growing the food. You would have gardens and crops and all of that stuff. Cooking the meals, um, making even fixing shoes and like all kinds of stuff that is now just consumer products. But these are all forms of collective labor, and they were not commodified because they were still within the household. The different kinds of labor which create these products, such as tilling the fields, tending the cattle, spinning, weaving, and making clothes, are already in their natural form social functions. For they are functions of the family, which just as much as a society based on commodity production possesses its own spontaneous developed division of labor. Right? So this is talking about the labor domestic sphere of labor, right? Social reproduction as the domestic sphere of labor, mostly done by women to maintain the household. And during the 18th century, the amount of labor done by women to maintain the household was immense, and would be equal or more to what would be done by a worker, the husband as a worker. Okay, so the distribution of labor within the family and the labor time expended by the individual members of the family are regulated by differences of sex and age, as well as by seasonal variations in the natural conditions of labor. Right, so mostly falling on women and children, and these tasks being distributed to them. The fact that the expenditure of the individual labor power is measured by duration appears here by its very nature as a social characteristic of the labor itself, because the individual labor powers, by their very nature, act only as instruments of the joint labor power of the family. So, hold on. Right? So, like, people might have to work different hours depending on their age or sex. Um, and, you have your chores, and it takes a certain amount of hours. Um, but these are all divided among a family who are joint members of the same household doing communal labor, um, not of commodities, but actually of tasks, right? And then we got this mention of a communist society, a sort of communist society. Let us imagine, for a change, an association of free men, working with the means of production held in common, and expending their many different forms of labor power in full self-awareness as one single social labor force. All the characteristics of Robinson's labor are repeated here, but with the difference that they are social instead of individual. All of Robinson's products were exclusively the result of his own personal labor, and they were therefore directly objects of utility for him personally. The total product of our imagined association is a social product. One part of this product serves as fresh means of production and remains social, but another part is consumed by members of the association as a means of subsistence. This part must therefore be divided among them. The way this division is made will vary with the particular kind of social organization of production and the corresponding level of social development attained by the producers. We shall assume, but only for the sake of a parallel with the production of commodities, that the share of each individual producer in the means of subsistence is determined by his labor time. Labor time would in that case play a double part. Its apportionment in accordance with a definite social plan maintains the correct proportion between the different functions of labor and the various needs of associations. So this is a society where everything's held in common, and all the workers are given each according to their contribution. So their share of the collective product of their cooperative labor is given in exact proportion to the labor time that they invest into the collective project. On the other hand, labor time also serves as a measure of the part taken by each individual in the common labor, and of his share in the part of the total product destined for his individual consumption. Right, so labor time definite social plan, different function of labor and the various needs of the association. So that's the what is required of the people. On the other hand, the amount that you take from the common labor is measured in labor time, and your share in the product is measured by the labor time. The social relations of the individual producers, both towards their labor and the products of their labor, are here transparent in their simplicity in production as well as distribution. Right? So it's one big metabolism of labor. Everyone's playing their part. Everyone's taking an equal part. This is one of the very few mentions of communism in Capital, Volume 1. There's another mention where communism is described in a very different way, where Marx talks about, gives a different picture than this one. So in this one, it would seem like there's no surplus value here, unless that's the needs of the association or the yeah, I'm not sure where that is, but in the other one, Marx says that there is a portion of surplus labor that is used as a public fund. For a society of commodity producers, so now we're back to commodity production, which is not exactly the same thing as capitalist production, but generalized commodity production is a feature of capitalism. So commodity producers, whose general social relation of production consists in the fact that they treat their products as commodities, hence as values, and in this material, sachlich, so not materiel, so zach is like thing, so thingly form, so reified form, we might say, bring their individual private labors into relation with each other as homogeneous human labor. For this society, Christianity, with its religious cult of man in the abstract, more particularly its bourgeois development, i.e. Protestantism, deism, etc., is the most fitting form of religion. It's a weird claim. It's not. It's like some Hegelianism, I think, in Marx right here. Like, so Hegel sees Christianity, there is neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, but all servants of God. He sees this as a kind of progressive core of Christianity, kind of liberal core of Christianity. And so Marx is kind of saying that, like, no, it's like Protestant Christianity viewing human beings abstractly, as abstractly human, is very appropriate to commodity production, which strips all individuals of their individual private labor and treats them all as universal, like brothers in commodity production. In the ancient Asiatic, classical, antique, and other such modes of production, the transformation of the product into a commodity, and therefore men's existence as producers of commodities, plays a subordinate role. So notice here, there is commodity production in the Asiatic mode of production and in classical antiquity. But commodity production plays a subordinate role, which however increases in importance as these communities approach near and near the stage of their dissolution. Trading nations. So a trading nation, which might not be a capitalist mode of production, but might be a commodity engaged in commodity production through a different mode of production. Trading nations, properly so called, exist only in the interstices. I don't know this word, but connections, I'm guessing, is what it means, of the ancient world, like the gods of Epicurus in the intermundia. So according to Greek philosopher Epicurus, The gods existed only in the intermundia, or spaces between different worlds, and had no influence on the course of human affairs. Very few writings of Epicurus have been preserved in the original Greek, and this particular idea only survived by being included in Cicero or Cicero De Natura Deorum, Book 1, Section 18. Or Jews in the pores of Polish society. So, yeah, I guess because like they would be living in Poland. I don't know much about the situation of Jews in Poland. I would imagine Marx, being a Jewish person, knows that. Um, so there are trading nations, but they're kind of like the interstices of the ancient world. Um, those ancient social organisms are much more simple and transparent than those of bourgeois society. But they are founded either on the immaturity of man as an individual when he has not yet torn himself loose from the umbilical cord of his natural species connection with other men, or on direct relations of dominance and servitude. I'm not sure what he's saying with this first thing about the natural species connection, but the domination and servitude makes sense. Wonder what the word is here. Herrschafts- und Knechtschaftsverhältnisse. So it's the same phrase used by Hegel in the Lordship and Bondage or Master-Slave dialectic. Yeah, so there could be a some Hegelian stuff coming in here, some Hegelian-inspired anthropology. They are conditioned by a low stage of development of the productive powers of labor and correspondingly limited relations between men and with the process of creating and reproducing their material life. Hence, also limited relations between man and nature. These real limitations are reflected in the ancient worship of nature and other elements of tribal religions. I don't remember all of this anthropology being here. The religious reflections on the real world can, in any case, vanish only when the practical relations of everyday life between man and nature, generally present themselves to him in a transparent and rational form. This is similar to like Lucretian atomism, which is what Marx wrote his dissertation on. I mean, there's already a reference to Epicurus. So like one big thing in Lucretius, he's a person who wrote a poem about atoms to explain Epicurean philosophy, and it's a great work. I would definitely recommend reading it. It's really influential on Marx. Is that Epicurus, or sorry, Lucretius is all about attacking superstition. And he gives the story of Agamemnon sacrificing his daughter Iphigenia because of superstition. And he says that these are the things that you would do when you don't understand the world rightly, when you don't realize that it's all just atoms and that gods exist, in the intermundia. They have no effect on the world. That everything is caused by real forces in nature. And so Marx is here thinking about religion and kind of superstition, a way of superstition. That it's a replacement. That religion goes away once rational forms replace things. And I mean, there is an element of truth to this, right? Like, although I don't know, I keep meeting comrades who believe in astrology, right? But like, there's a certain way in which the more educated your mind is, the less it is possible to put stock into certain forms of superstition. Let's just put it that way. Um, as in believing like that things are signs or that things are bad omens or things along these lines. I don't mean to like tread on anyone's like personal like religious convictions that are like a source of strength or whatnot. But as far as actually rituals trying to affect nature in a magical kind of way, that these things would seem to be less prevalent the more scientific of a view one has, generally speaking. The veil is not removed from the countenance of the social life process, that is, the process of material production, until it becomes a production by freely associated men, and then stands on their consciousness and plan and control. So that's the analogy he's making here. So just like you're still going to see the world through forms of religious, or let's say superstitious, through a superstitious lens, until you have a rational form that you can see things in, where you can understand causes and effects scientifically. Fetishism won't disappear until communism or high-stage socialism. Things are going to appear. Fetishism, things are going to appear as a value relationship between objects until society is reorganized around the rational planning. Because once that happens, then it's clear that labor is being traded, that one form of labor is being exchanged with another form of labor. That we're talking about a metabolism of different forms of labor, of individual labors being put together as part of a common project. This, however, requires that society possess a material foundation, or a series of material conditions of existence, which in their turn are the natural and spontaneous products of a long and tormented historical development. So that would be the sufficient material base for socialism or communism. Okay, political economy has indeed analyzed value and its magnitude, however incompletely. There's a note on Ricardo here. I won't go into the details here, but you can read this if you want to see where Marx thinks Ricardo's analysis is wrong. And has uncovered the content concealed within these forms. And that's because Ricardo and Smith had discovered the labor theory of value. They didn't have it exactly in the same form as Marx, but they understand the things that Marx did. Now, mainstream economics today rejects classical economics. Neoclassical economics only sees value as what a consumer is willing to pay. So it's all about just trying to figure out how to set prices to get that little extra of oh, we made the consumer pay a little bit more. But it doesn't have a theory of value like this, and it's ahistorical. But it has never once asked the question why this content has assumed that particular form. So they don't ask the question of why labor is expressed in value. That is to say, why labor is expressed in value, and why the measurement of labor by its duration is expressed in the magnitude of the value of the product. So here we have a note. It is one of the chief failings of classical political economy that it has never succeeded, by means of its analysis of commodities, in particular the value, in discovering the form of value which in fact turns value into exchange value. Even its best representatives, Smith and Ricardo, treat the form of value as something of indifference, something external to the nature of the commodity itself. The explanation of this is not simply that their attention is entirely absorbed by the analysis of the magnitude of value. It lies deeper. The value form of the product of labor is the most abstract but also the most universal form of the bourgeois mode of production. By that fact, it stamps the bourgeois mode of production as a particular kind of social production of a historical and transitory character. If we then make the mistake of treating it as the eternal, natural form of social production, we necessarily overlook the specificity of the value form, and consequently of the commodity form, together with its further developments, the money form, capital form, etc. We therefore find that the economists, who are entirely agreed that labor time is the measure of the magnitude of value, have the strangest and most contradictory ideas about money, about the universal equivalent in its finished form. This emerges sharply when they deal with banking, where the commonplace definition of money is no longer hold water. Hence there has risen opposition to the classical economists, a restored mercantilist system, which sees value as in value the only social form, or rather its insubstantial semblance. Let me point out once and for all that by classical political economy, I mean all the economists who, since the time of W. Petty, have investigated the real internal framework Zusammenhang of bourgeois relations of production, as opposed to the vulgar economists. That's the so the vulgar economists, the people that he thinks are just ideologues, who only flounder around within the apparent framework of those relations, ceaselessly ruminate on the materials long since provided by scientific political economy, and seek their plausible explanations of the crudest phenomena for the domestic purposes of the bourgeoisie. Apart from this, vulgar economists confine themselves to systematizing in a pedantic way and proclaiming for the everlasting truths the banal and complacent notions held by the bourgeois agents of production about their own world, which is to them the best possible one. A little Leibniz illusion at the end. Okay, this footnote's really important. Annoyingly so, and I'm not sure if I can do it justice right now, but I'm going to try. Let me backtrack and then go back to the first part. Okay. Sorry. Checking the German real quick. Sorry. That's interesting. Yeah, so I'm missing part of this in the or the note's just weird. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay. Yeah, so I'm missing this part of the footnote in my German copy, unfortunately. So it must have been added in a different edition. Because this would be interesting to know for tracking Marx's concept of appearance. But I really wanted to talk about is this footnote. So this footnote right here is really big for value form theorists, like what's the guy Stoney, and this is the one piece of textual evidence that they use to argue that the value form is a contingent or is originates in capitalism. Which, if that's a valid interpretation of this passage, would seem to contradict Marx's earlier claim that it was Aristotle who discovered the value form, because Aristotle most certainly did not live in a capitalist society. But, okay. The value form of the product of labor is the most abstract, but also the most universal form of the bourgeois mode of production. By that fact, it stamps the bourgeois mode of production as a particular kind of social production of a historical and transitory character. If then we make the mistake of treating it as the eternal natural form of social production, we necessarily overlook the specificity of the value form, and consequently of the commodity form together with its further developments, the money form or the capital form, etc. So then this is used to claim that the value form only originates within bourgeois society, which is not, I mean, this is not him saying, like, this is like a side comment. There's no theory or development of, like, claiming that, like, here's when it originated or something like this. But I remember looking at this in German and seeing some strangeness here. I'll just say that I think that maybe you could read him talking about the particularity of the value form under bourgeois production. But I'll leave this as a mystery, and maybe I will write something about it at some point, since I don't want to get us hung up on this. But just to draw your attention to it, this is the place in the literature where value form theorists draw their arguments from. Okay. So where were we before we jumped in the giant footnote? Okay, so political economy did some things that were nice, but it doesn't ask why the content assumes the particular form. Why is labor expressed in value? And why is the measurement of labor by its duration expressed in the magnitude of the value of the product? These formulas, which bear the unmistakable stamp of belonging to a social formation in which the process of production has mastery over man instead of the opposite, appear to the political economist bourgeois consciousness to be as much a self-evident and nature-imposed necessity as productive labor itself. So for the value form to exist, there has to be some form of fetishism. Okay. So you can have commodity markets too without them being the bourgeois capitalist economy market or commodity market. But you can't have the value form in the communal or domestic sphere. At least you can't have it attached to commodities. You can't have the commodities appear to be where the relations are taking place. The labor is more transparent. Hence, the pre-bourgeois forms of the social organization of production are treated by political economy much the same way as the fathers of the church treated pre-Christian religions. So it's like saying, like, they try to like look at them, they're like, oh, there was a kernel of truth within the Egyptian religion because it was similar to Christianity, but it was ultimately just a a corrupt form of what would later be the truth of Christianity. That's how they see previous modes of production. It's like on its way to capitalism. It's like how Hegel treats Christianity. To the degree to which some economists are misled by the fetishism attached to the world of commodities, or by the objective appearance of the social characteristics of labor. Let's see what objective appearance is here. So Gegenständlichen Schein. So shine meaning false appearance here. So objective here not meaning objective in the sense of, as opposed to objective in the sense of epistemological sense of meaning like factually true or without like bad, like without being relativistic or subjectivistic, but objective in the sense of like pertaining to objects. The objective appearance of the social characteristics of labor, that is the false appearance of them being qualities of objects, that's what fetishism is shown, among other things, by the dull and tedious dispute over the part played by nature in the formation of exchange value. Some debate that I'm not familiar with here. But I guess this would be like, whether like things have a natural value before labor is added to them. Since exchange value is a definite social manner of expressing the labor bestowed on a thing, it can have no more natural content than has, for example, the rate of exchange. Checks out. As the commodity form is the most general and most undeveloped form of bourgeois production, it makes its appearance at an early date, though not in the same predominant and therefore characteristic manner as nowadays. Hence, its fetish character is still relatively easy to penetrate. But when we come to more concrete forms, even this appearance of simplicity vanishes. So appearance here is shine, so semblance of simplicity. So the semblance vanishes. It seemed simple, but now it doesn't even seem simple. Where did the illusions of the monetary system come from? This is outside of my knowledge base as a philosopher, not a political economist. The adherents of the monetary system did not see gold and silver as representing money as a social relation of production, but in the form of natural objects with particular social properties. And what of modern political economy, which looks down so disdainfully on the monetary system? Does not its fetishism come quite palpable when it deals with capital? How long since the disappearance of the physiocratic illusion that ground rent grows out of the soil, not out of society? Illusion here is illusion, so just illusion. Illusion. But to avoid it, so these are, previous theories that Marx talks about a lot, and I just have not done the work of the history of political economy to say much about these, being primarily a philosopher. But it would be interesting to go look at these in detail and see how Marx is reading them. But to avoid anticipating, we'll content ourselves here only with one more example relating to the commodity form itself. Here, commodities are going to start talking. If commodities could speak, they would say this: our use value may interest men, but it does not belong to us as objects. What does belong to us as objects, however, is our value. Our own intercourse as commodities proves it. Oh, so objects is a strange translation here because it's dingen, so thing. We relate to each other merely as exchange values. Now listen how those commodities speak through the mouth of the economist. Value, i.e. exchange value, is a property of things. Riches, i.e. use value of man. Value in this sense necessarily implies exchanges. Riches do not. Who is this book by? I feel like I've looked this up at one point. Oh, the author is unknown, I guess. So this is fetishism. The value is seen as a property of the things, even though it implies exchanges. Riches, use value, are the attribute of man. Value is an attribute of commodities. A man or a commodity is rich. A pearl or a diamond is valuable. A pearl or a diamond is valuable as a pearl or a diamond. This is really fascinating, right? That's a direct inversion. Riches are an attribute of man. Use value, that belongs to people, right? Like, this pencil is only good for writing because, like, of me somehow. It's like it would be interesting to, like, read, like, Heidegger through this lens or something, right? Where Dasein's, like, adding the properties, but Heidegger doesn't give this, like, full account of the material side of what he calls the ready to hand. But yeah, no, use values are properties of the things. Value is the attribute of commodities. But that's not true. Value is about how we exchange the labor with each other, right? Very interesting. So far, no chemist has ever discovered exchange value, either in a pearl or a diamond. And this is a point that he's repeated throughout this entire chapter. You can't dust for exchange value. Exchange value only exists in a relationship between commodities. And the objective basis of this exchange value is relating one form of labor to another. And then this is quantitatively measured in terms of the socially necessary labor time that is required for society to produce that commodity. The economists who have discovered this chemical substance and who lay special claim to critical acumen nevertheless find that the use value of material objects belongs to them independently of their material properties, while their value, on the other hand, forms part of them as objects. I kind of do want to read Heidegger from this perspective now. As like this would be a good critical lens to take, because it's not being added to the properties by Dasein. Like, my mind doesn't make this pencil be capable of writing. But value, and so that's the inversion here. The use value appears as subjective and relative, even though it's material, and value, although it's social and relative, insofar as it's not relative in the sense that it's made up, but relative in the sense that it's a relation between commodities, seems to these people as if those are objective features when really they're social features. What confirms them in this view is that the peculiar circumstance that the use value of a thing is realized without exchange, that is, in the direct relation between thing and man, while inversely its value is realized only in exchange, in a social process. Who would not call to mind at this point the advice given by the good Dogberry to the night watchman, Seacole? Yeah, it's got to be Shakespeare, of course. Marx loved Shakespeare. He read all of Shakespeare in English every year, which was not his native language. He would read it to his daughters. His daughters could quote Shakespeare from memory and would perform it for guests. He also read Aeschylus in ancient Greek every year, so he's always quoting Shakespeare. To be a well-favored man is the gift of fortune, but reading and writing comes by nature. Right? So it would be the... I'm not sure if well-favored is like a double entendre here, but... reading and writing doesn't come by nature. Right? One has to do those things. All right. There's a lot left in this chapter that is worth pondering over that we weren't able to go into fully. I think there's a lot to be mined from this chapter. Sometimes, though, people fixate only on the fetishism chapter and make their whole reading of Marx about fetishism. I'm not one of those people. I've always been more interested in understanding like labor and valorization and really getting into the political economy side of things, even though I have more of a philosophy background. But it is really interesting to think about what this all entails. These reifications and this fetishism. Well, it's been an hour on the dot. The next chapter is called The Process of Exchange. And these early chapters are going to be really, really interesting. I think this one's relatively short. And then we have the money chapter after this, yeah. So we're going to start actually introducing the fact that there are two people trading with each other now, if I remember correctly. But these early chapters are very dialectical and very interesting, so I think we'll find a lot of useful stuff here. So stay tuned for the next installment next Tuesday at 7 p.m. I'm going to be figuring out some more content to do for this channel soon. Been talking to some people about maybe getting some guest appearances on here. I might do some shorter like responses to articles and things like that. So stay tuned for that. I've also started actually making use of my TikTok a little bit more. So check that out. That's going to be a little bit more accessible content. Me, responding to things and debating and things like that. So stay tuned for more stuff. Thank you for tuning in. Try to throw some support if you can, liking, subscribing, hitting me up on Patreon if you feel so inclined.